Okay, so now we have an idea of how changes in disposable income are going to change our desired consumption. So that induced parts, remember we had C equals little a plus b times yd, and we talked about how changes in disposable income, so a $1 increase in disposable income would increase consumption or desired consumption expenditure by b, which would be between 0 and 1. So now let's talk about the other factors. A few minutes ago, seems like forever ago now, we talked about other factors that influence. We talked about disposable income already, so I won't include that, but we talked about wealth. We talked about interest rates, and we talked about expectations about the future. All right, so let's kind of go through these one by one and think about how they're going to affect our consumption. So let's start off with wealth. I think this is fairly intuitive. If our wealth goes up, if wealth increases, this will increase consumption for all levels of disposable income. So it's basically going to shift up by increasing A. You can think about it as A goes up. Okay, so, and then vice versa as well. If wealth goes down, decrease in consumption or desired consumption, if I want to be a bit more careful here, for all levels of YD. So little a would be going down. So changes in wealth are essentially, think of it like this, changes in wealth, here's that 45-degree line, changes in wealth, for instance, are just shifting this consumption function up or down. So for instance, if wealth goes up, we shift up, and maybe I'll get another color here. C equals A prime plus B times YD. Okay, so that's how wealth is going to affect our consumption function. It's just going to change the intercept. Okay, so now we've talked about wealth already. Now we can kind of concentrate on how interest rates changing are going to affect our consumption function. So to our interest rates. Remember, the interest rate is like the price of borrowing money, or you get interest when you save money and you invest it. So the interest rate, an increase in the interest rate is going to cause a decrease in desired consumption for all levels of YD. So you can think of it as like the benefit of saving money goes up, so people start to consume less, and they might save more. The interest rate goes up, it's also more expensive to borrow money to finance your consumption as well, right? So that's the idea there. And so, same sense, this pen is not the greatest. A decrease in the interest rate is going to cause an increase in desired consumption. And so we might think that, this, you might be thinking, well, this could affect the slope of the consumption function as well. Wouldn't that have influenced the marginal propensity to consume? We'll talk about that later a bit. Right now we're thinking of it just kind of shifting this consumption function. So again, if we have our consumption function here, we have our 45-degree line, what's happening here is, this is A, oops, just A, getting ahead of myself there, and C equals A plus B times YD, and the slope is B. Right now we're not going to assume it changes the slope of the consumption function. So for instance, if the interest rate goes up, increases, what's going to happen is that this A is going to shift down, but we're going to keep the slope the same for now. A prime plus BYD. So increase in the interest rate is going to shift this consumption function down and kind of reduce desired consumption for all levels of YD. And finally, we can talk about these expectations about the future. Just give me a second to erase this board and we can kind of quickly talk about that. All right, so we talked about the interest rates, and finally this 3 expectations about the future and how they're going to influence expectations. Well, this is, I think, fairly intuitive. If we think that if we're really bullish, or we think the economy is going to do really well in the future, we're going to increase our consumption today. So an increase in expectations. So when expectations are high about the future, this is going to cause an increase in desired consumption for all levels of YD. So again, another shift in the in the consumption function. If our expectations about the future are lower, if we're really pessimistic or bearish about what's going to happen to the economy in the next bit, well, we might reduce our consumption and save a bit more because we're kind of worried about what's going to happen to our income in the future. And so this would be a decrease in desired consumption. So expectations are a critical part, a really important part about our spending, and in terms of what we think is going to happen in the future, really influences our decisions today. It'll influence firms' decisions as well. Desired consumption, so it's an increase in desired for all levels of YD. So we can draw out the same graph as we've kind of been drawing. Again, we have consumption, desired consumption, and disposable income. We have our 45-degree line where they're equal to each other. And what's going to happen here is, let's say this is A, this is B, and this is our current consumption. And all of a sudden, we're really optimistic about vaccines and things coming out, and we think things are going to get better in the future. Well, increase in confidence, or whatever we want to call it, or expectations. Well, this is going to shift our whole consumption function up, and for all levels of YD, we're consuming more. So the slope doesn't change, but again, we have just a shift in the consumption function. Hopefully that's still in the field of view there. All right, so changes in the marginal propensity to consume are going to change the slope of this consumption function. Changes in YD are going to change consumption by that change in YD times B, which is the marginal propensity to consume. And then we have these other 3 factors, wealth, interest rates, and expectations, that are also shifting this consumption function up and down. All right, so we kind of have a handle on how we're thinking about desired consumption. Now let's think about investment, and then we can introduce equilibrium and changes in equilibrium.